Hi, everybody. Marcel here with another episode of Everyday Leadership. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to create a coaching culture in your organization. And that is becoming a really big topic. And today's guest is named Philippe Suzor-Morin. And Philippe is actually the head of learning and development with the Bank of Montreal here in Canada. So for once, we're actually in the same time zone with my guest, which is really nice. Of course, for our viewers out in Singapore, it is right now, it's a beautiful sunny day out here in Toronto, but you might be in halfway in the middle of the night. So I hope you're up and I hope you're watching, because this is going to be a really interesting conversation if you want a coaching culture for your organization as well. So I'm going to just change screen here and bring Philippe on.
Hey, Philippe, you are now live with my audience. Say hi to the gang.
Good evening to our friends out in Asia, and good morning to everyone here in North America. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me, Marcel.
My pleasure, and thanks so much for for doing this. It is such a relevant topic, right? The creating that coaching culture, and there are probably a lot of people who have that burning question: how do I do that? But before we do that, let's just do a little bit of a kind of a background story, kind of on how you got it, because I know that you're also a certified coach. You've been involved in coaching for a long time. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I think my story is unique in how I got into coaching, because I did it. I like to say I did it the other way around, which is I started my career with coaching, whereas a lot of people, find out about coaching or transition into being a coach, midway through their career, or in some cases towards the later end of their career. And so for me, I was in my early 20s. I had graduated from university, studying psychology, political psychology to be specific, and knowing very well that I didn't want to get into clinical psychology, but I was really I was fascinated by human behavior in the workplace and politics, and so I not really knowing what I wanted to do. I decided to go out and move to Asia. So I'm originally born in the States, Canadian raised, flown through from Canadian parents, and so I did most of my education here in Canada. But I always had this thirst for traveling, and so I made my way to Thailand back in early '05, just after the tsunami hit, and what I did is I went out and traveled and volunteered in places that had been completely devastated by the Asian tsunami. And as months kind of carried on, I started meeting people, and a friend of a friend who was based in the UK had mentioned coaching. And I had no idea what that was. That was certainly not a topic that had been taught at school. And so I, as any lifelong learner would do, I went out and bought all the books I could find on coaching, and it didn't take very long for me to say, wow, there's something magnetic here. There's something that is energizing. To work with people, to help them, work towards achieving their goals and towards unlocking their potential. I knew this was something that was of interest to me. So all of that to say is that I eventually settled down in Hong Kong for about 3.5 years, where I ran my coaching practice and training practice, and really got engrossed in it. I did my coaching studies in Australia, and even did a year stint in Singapore, which I think is kind of funny how you and I connected, Marcel. So I know. So coaching has always been, since a young age, I'd say probably since the age of 25, it's been part of my career journey, and I'm very, very grateful to be now in an organization that truly values coaching, values personal and professional growth, and where I can, really apply this knowledge and experience that I have.
Beautiful. Yeah, great. And what an incredible story, right? Just having that amazingly adventurous spirit, right? And what strikes me about this is so many coaches, right, that I get to speak with and get to learn from. We all have this interesting story that, so many of us are kind of made from a different type of clay, right?
Yeah.
And it's very often that, and I get this question a lot, from younger coaches, younger upcoming coaches, and they're like, I don't know if I can make a good coach. I'm still too young. Who's going to want to listen to me? Who's going to, kind of all of those kind of, things. And for me, it really is, and honestly speaking, I probably had, kind of similar questions as well when I started coaching. I've been coaching now for an executive coaching for about 10 years, as well as before that I was a wellness coach for another 15 years. But in terms of the executive and leadership coaching, I often, when I was first starting off, I was kind of like, I don't come from that corporate background. I don't come from that corporate space, right? So what value can I potentially add a person if I don't come from that space? And only to find out, actually, just through practice, is actually because I didn't come from that corporate space, is that I could actually offer some insights and some value, because I see things from which I inherently already do. I have a tendency to see things in a different way than most other people. I used to think I was just screwed up, but but happens to be I'm a coach, right? And it's quite interesting that we all have, as coaches, that kind of similar thing about us, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think you nailed it there. There's because I went through that, being in my early 20s. I remember taking my coaching course in Australia, and I was surrounded by people in, well in their 40s and 50s. And I had no working experience other than summer jobs here and there. And so I really had to think about, what is my value proposition here as a young coach? I mean, I was hungry. I had an appetite. I had energy. I had passion. Which I still do to this day, but I didn't have that work experience. And what I quickly realized was that my value proposition was the fact that I didn't have that bias. I had curiosity on my side. Where I think a lot of time, and even today, I struggle a little bit with that, where, you juggle between that mentor role and coach, where you're tempted to give advice. You're tempted to tell people, hey, you know what, this is what you could do. Or these are your options. And I didn't have that as a young coach. And so for me, it was really mastering the art of curiosity, of asking thought-provoking questions and really challenging people on their thoughts. And preconceived notions. So that to me, that was the benefit that I brought to my coaching conversations.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You use the word curiosity, right? Because I think that's such an important word, and it's actually something that I in kind of I have a coach, right? And something in my own coaching. That I've had a conversation with regards to my coaching. I find that the more knowledgeable that I've become in life, right, that the less curious I've become, and it's almost like the one can potentially be an enemy of the other. Right, where if we want to be curious, right, of course we're going to accumulate knowledge and we're going to accumulate experience in life, right? But I think the ability to remain curious and to want to explore kind of other areas and things like that is such a critical part. And anyway, what I found for myself is, as I started to believe that I knew things, right, I started to kind of create my own discourse in terms of my own box of how I was looking at things and how I kind of view coaching and view kind of like how things should be, right, and in that space, curiosity disappears, and instead you spend all of your energy just trying to prove yourself right. Right. You know, and that's something that, you know, I now kind of need a coach for, right, to kind of help me, you know, kind of just stay connected with that you know, that curiosity that we need, right, as, and I don't think only as coaches, right, because that's kind of where I want to tie this in with regards to for organizations. You know, I think for most organizations, they drive the machine, right? The big, you know, the big factory in terms of how they operate. A lot of it's driven on knowledge, right? It's driven on experience, on knowledge, and sticking with, listen, we're going to stick with what we know, what that works, right? Rather than, you know, we're going to kind of use our curiosity, explore if things can be better or if we can do things differently. And I can see how, you know, a lot of organizations where their level of curiosity can drop as well, just simply because they're so stuck in what they know, right? So you know, and hence this is such an important conversation, right? You know, in terms of talking about kind of, you know, creating a coaching culture within an organization and the type of conversations that we really want to be triggering, right? So kind of going back to that, when did you, you know, kind of like, because you said you didn't have any working experience, right? And so then you got into the Bank of Montreal and then you got hired into this role. How did that go for you?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, leading up, so I joined the Bank of Montreal 6 years ago. And at the time, just prior to that, I moved from Singapore to Canada in 2010. So I've been here now for 10 years in Canada, but 6 years with BMO, and so the majority of my time over the last 10 years was spent in a facilitator role. So I worked at our corporate university, our Institute for Learning here in Toronto, that's fully dedicated to upskilling our workforce. And so this was to me that really connected with my value, you know, an organization that values learning to the point where they have a corporate university and they're willing to make that investment in people and fly them in from all over the world to really bring their level of skills and knowledge to a point where, you know, we're being competitive as an organization internationally. And so I spent a lot of time in facilitation, so doing leadership courses, doing courses on coaching, on sales, and then a couple of years ago, I made the jump to a more headquarter role where really what I'm working on in my role as a senior manager of learning and performance is really helping steer our personal and business banking workforce that is, you know, well in over 1,000 employees, 1,000 leaders rather, and to really kind of adopt a coaching culture, make coaching part of their daily life, and not just necessarily one-on-one coaching, but coaching activities, things that reinforce, that upskill, that hold people accountable to their commitments, and constantly striving for improvement on that front. And so it's been great to kind of really now be in the role, in the position where I can really do what I love and what I'm passionate about, and have an impact on so many employees.
Absolutely. And what do you know? I mean, I'm sure when you kind of went into this role, right? You know, you had a vision for yourself, right? You know, in terms of what you would want. How did you find, you know, kind of going off into what were some of your kind of biggest challenges that you felt you had to overcome, you know, in when you started this process?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, kudos to my peers who've been on the team and working with these leaders for years before I joined in, who really helped, instill this culture of coaching, because they've done phenomenal work. And really the biggest challenge, and this is a challenge that I believe impacts, a lot of people, a lot of organizations these days, is, how do we make coaching stick? How do we make it stick when there's so many distractions, when, you just look at what we're going through at the moment, the pandemic, with customers' needs that are shifting day by day. How do we ensure that our leaders are still valuing professional growth, and still valuing coaching as a tool to get the workforce to produce and reach their full potential. And so that's certainly been a challenge. I've had the opportunity to listen to a lot of great coaching conversations. I try and spend some time doing that just to really understand what the conversations are like right now, to establish kind of a current state, and really start thinking about, okay, what should this future state look like for these leaders? What are the skills gaps or knowledge gap that we have to focus on? And so I've learned a lot through that, and for me, part of my vision for our leaders is that we develop into a culture of high performance. And high performance, yes, coaching is a huge enabler of that, but also honing in on accountability, on ownership, on personal ownership. That, when I say I'm going to do something and I'm going to commit to certain behaviors and actions, that we are holding those people accountable to their words, and we're supporting them towards those goals. So that's been kind of my personal challenge over the last couple of years, is really kind of to strengthen that kind of high performance accountability culture.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So I mean, that's a big vision, right? So what do you find from a coach's perspective, right? Because as coaches, we're all somehow involved in trying to hold our clients accountable for their own development, right? In a certain way. What kind of techniques or kind of methodologies do you like to approach that you find are really working well within that corporate kind of environment?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is really spend time with them, spend time being there in the field. So in my case, I work with a lot of branch managers, regional vice presidents, and so being out there in the field, listening to conversations, listening to people's challenges and struggles in their coaching conversations, having that exposure. So I'm not necessarily standing there in the ivory tower and dictating what should be, but really, turning this into a co-creation. I think that's such an important part of my role in order to really connect with our workforce.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a really big thing too, like in terms of like rapport, right? Because as coaches we have to have that chemistry, right? And so I can only see that being magnified considerably in your case, because you have a much larger organization. It's easy for somebody like me who works a lot with one-on-one or reasonably small teams of 10, 12 people. It's quite easy maintaining kind of that rapport and that chemistry. But when you have such a large organization and there are so many people that are involved in these type of conversations, that can be quite challenging. How do you manage that connection, with so many people?
Open dialogue. Dialogue, Marcel, is really key. I make myself available to our leaders. If they're challenged with a certain employee, they don't know how to get to them, how to connect with them. I really make myself available to them at all times, so that I can be a coach to them. I can listen to them. I can challenge them. I can help them articulate what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve. And so being that person that they can rely on and come to at all times is one way of really adding value to this.
Mm-hmm. Is it as I'm hearing? I mean, because of course I have a lot of conversations, right, with leaders and various different organizations and stuff like that, and a very popular argument that I hear from a lot of managers is, I can do this myself, right? Kind of where the ego kind of takes over, and people are like, hey, listen, this is something I should be able to do myself, and that, and I don't necessarily need help in this space, right? So is that something that you have, that you kind of have to overcome in the current organization in the same way? With some people, and if yes, what would you do, right, in a case like that? Or it could be that you don't have it, right? So I mean, that's a possibility as well.
Yeah. I mean, of course, I think there's people out there that and it kind of goes back to the conversation that we were having earlier, where over time your thirst for curiosity diminishes. And so you kind of get set in your ways, and you get comfortable in your ways. And so the way that I approach any coaches that say, I've got this, I'm good, is I come in and say, let me learn from you. Let me learn from you. I want to hear and see what's been working for you, and so that I can share those best practices, your approach to coaching that you seem to be so set in, so I can share that with the rest of the organization and other leaders. And that's been my way of approaching that for this time, is really coming in from what can I learn from you? Teach me. If it's working so well for you, let's spread the wealth.
Oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, so kind of you using a kind of a motivational interviewing, kind of type approach, coming from a positivity standpoint, keeping things above the line, having those positive conversations in that kind of space. So that makes sense. If there's anybody listening that says, hey, I would love to be able to, kind of get my organization more involved in developing a coaching culture, right? Yeah. What kind of, where would they need to start with something like that?
It's such a great question, Marcel. I think the first place to start with is really to look at our organization and think about, what are the values that we live? And oftentimes, company values are things that are on the wall, things that you see, here and there, but they're not truly lived. And so I think that before launching a coaching culture, it's important to look at, how are we living our values at the moment? How are those communicated? How are those rewarded? How are they part of our everyday life? Inside the organization and outside of it, how we deal with society and our communities. And so I think that's the first thing, is to look inwards and look at our values. And once we have that, then it's about asking ourselves, so what am I really trying to accomplish here by instilling coaching or implementing coaching within this organization? Am I looking at increasing engagement? Am I looking at increasing sales results? Am I doing it for solely personal growth or professional growth? Is it coming in as simply as a benefit? One of our benefits list to employees. So really to ask ourselves, where does the need for coaching come from, and what exactly are we trying to accomplish? And I think that once we have a good understanding of what our values are and how we live them and what we're trying to accomplish, with coaching, I think that's where we try to bring them together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we create, communication, and a message of saying, this is why coaching belongs in our culture. This is why it belongs in our organization, and this is how it's going to make us all better.
Mm-hmm.
And by all better, I mean not just leaders, not just like C-suite executives,
Mm-hmm.
not just middle managers, but also employees,
Mm-hmm.
frontline employees that deal with customers every day. What's in it for them. So I think that really, having a firm understanding and being able to articulate company values and what we're trying to achieve with coaching, and then blending them together, that's how we start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, is definitely tying that into kind of the, values and needs, right? And it's just interesting because it is something that I still hear a lot, or I even hear we don't need coaching, right?
Yeah.
As if coaching only happens if something's broken or somebody is broken, right? And it's actually what research shows is the opposite is true, right? If things are going well, that's actually when you want to be looking at a more of a coaching culture, because then you can go from going well to going better to being best, right? And so what can we do to kind of elevate things, even further? It's a coach can't fix a person that's broken. Unfortunately, only a person who's broken can fix a person who's broken, right? They can only fix themselves, right? So I also think there's a still kind of a tremendous, misunderstanding, I think, within the corporate world, right? There's that misconception of what coaching really is and how it can really benefit, right? What is that return of investment really, right? And then of course there are these occasional organizations that have bought into that, long time ago and said, we're doing it over the whole organization.
Yeah.
And a funny story is as you're talking about kind of even frontline workers and things like that, and I think that's such an important thing, and I even think that has to do with kind of how we educate leadership, right? For me, leadership isn't just something that's privy to people who are in paid management positions and therefore automatically have some form of, kind of leadership status, right? But I really believe that leadership is an attitude, right? It's a mindset that should belong to everybody in the organization, right? And actually great leaders are also really great followers. And part of leadership is learning when to actually surrender to the expertise and to the knowledge, right, of other people, and be able to say, I'm happy being the follower in this instance. You lead me, right? And I think that's for an entire organization, that is such an important balance that and I see that, and particularly, of course, because I do a lot of work in Asia. I see that a lot in organizations in Asia, where there's still very much that kind of that vertical thinking, unless we're dealing with kind of multinationals that are kind of have somewhat of a coaching structure already kind of built into them. But generally speaking, there is, listen, we'll wait for the leader, right? To kind of dictate what's going to happen, and we'll just sit back and wait. And I think that is such a waste of resources, right? Because there's such a wealth of knowledge and experience and curiosity and creativity and all of these kind of things in an entire organization versus, just in a few people, that are at the top. There's just not enough capacity there to kind of maintain that. So I even feel that in terms of leadership training, right? That the whole organization should go through some form of leadership training, even the frontline workers, right? That they learn from that. And a good example is I was in a conversation a little while ago. Actually, I should bring him on the show. I'll talk to him about it. He's from Finland, and he runs a leadership institute called Deep Leadership. And when with the Deep Leadership, what ended up happening was the Finnish military ended up adopting their leadership model. And for some reason, the people from Finland, they're so forward thinking, right? They are, with their education, with, all of this kind of stuff. And so I was asking, this guy who started Deep Leadership, and I said, how is that in Finland people are so forward thinking? He says, well, one of the reasons is because they teach leadership to everybody. So everybody learns from when they're in school to leadership is a really important thing. So people naturally are much more kind of curious and out of the box, but they're also much more courageous when it comes down to, daring to break ties with what they traditionally thought they knew, and, kind of all of that kind of stuff. And so they're a lot more adventurous as well with kind of how they explore their challenges and how they overcome things. And it's quite interesting how a coaching culture, even outside of just an organization, but even if you created a coaching culture as a culture in a country, how that can make such a big difference in how a country can operate, right? Because of that. It's fascinating.
I think one thing that often gets overlooked, Marcel, is we put a lot of focus, we put a lot of energy into training our leaders at coaching, teaching them, what's in it for them, what are the skills, what's the process like. But one thing that we overlook is the recipient of coaching, the coachee, and increasing their knowledge of from the onset, what's coaching. What are the benefits of coaching? What is it going to feel like? What is it going to look like? And so what happens is we develop training for coaches, but then we leave it up to them to communicate what's coaching and the benefits of coaching to employees. And if you think about it, if you're new to coaching, you're a new manager, you're a new leader, you've never done that before, you've never experienced it yourself as a recipient of it as a coachee. For you to be able to communicate what's in it and what it is a monumental task, and I would go as far as saying unfair to them. And so I think that to create that coaching culture, we also have to think about, how are we currently onboarding employees at all levels of the organization, and how can we make coaching part of that dialogue from the very beginning? Say, there'll be times where, you'll need your manager to help you solve a problem. And you know what? There's going to be times where you already have the answer to your question, but you're looking for validation. And,
I think that's
expect someone to jump in.
I think that's such a fantastic point.
Expect someone to pause there and show curiosity and ask you questions and really kind of bring out your thought process into why you think we should do it this way or do this way. And I think that's something that gets overlooked. And so, when I think of my vision for coaching at BMO, and obviously my role is really focused on personal and business banking in the moment, but I would love to create a coaching center of excellence where all groups of the bank, I'm talking wealth, capital markets, technology, can really come together and share ways that we can, I guess perhaps deeply root coaching into our culture and not just make it about leadership, but really make it about everyone.
Yeah, and that is such a good point too, right? Because I love that, is not even necessarily a coaching culture. It's a coachability culture.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's maybe that's something that we actually need to be actively talking about, right? Is when an organization says we want a coaching culture, say, well, should we start with having a coachability culture, right? And how coachable is our culture really, right? And what can we do to help drive that coachability, and being coachable comes with a great deal amount, of humility and courage and, and discipline,
Absolutely.
right? So Marshall Goldsmith says, those are the three cornerstones for success, right? Is courage, humility, and discipline. And yeah, so I love that, and maybe that's the same counts with leadership, right? We can only really lead if we have an organization of leadership and followership, right? Do we have a leadership and followership organization? Because that's when we can create, great leaders who practice leadership and followership, right? So that's fantastic, fantastic stuff. What would you say, if when we kind of get into that organizational kind of framework, right? Is what would you say would be some of the, for any organization to start, what would be some of the major bottlenecks? Because going into an organization that already has a coaching culture is like you said, you end up inheriting a number of kind of things that help you kind of build that. But what if somebody in Asia is watching this and they kind of say, okay, so where would they be able to expect kind of some of those bottlenecks where they say, hey, this is an area where I should be looking, right? In terms of kind of driving some of that culture. What would you see?
Yeah, and I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. It's education or re-education.
Okay.
I just remember my time in Asia and even here in North America, I hear it at work sometime that coaching is associated with being a remedial action. It's used to shake up someone, punish someone. And so I think that's one thing to expect from the get-go is that not everyone will have the same definition of coaching. So level setting people's understanding of it will be a key, I think, a key milestone in on your path, on your journey to launching a coaching journey. So a coaching culture. So I'd say education is going to be crucial. Obviously, another possible obstacle is it is critical, and this applies to so many things in organizations these days. But it's critical to have buy-in from our top leaders. There's no question there, right? There's no question there. We could do all the work we wanted on middle management and below, but if we don't have buy-in, if we don't have role models, if we don't have ambassadors, people that can speak up, people that can really live what coaching is, then that's going to be another obstacle along the way. So those are our two things that come top of mind, is perhaps very obvious when we think about it, but certainly we have to prepare for that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So I think a couple of takeaways for me, right, is the coachability culture. I think that's a very powerful statement, and probably a lot of organizations don't necessarily kind of evaluate themselves that way, right? Because they have a tendency to be very profit and productivity and performance driven, but not necessarily from a coachability. So if anybody's watching, right, that wants to know that, is make sure your organization's coachable, and if not, start there, right? You start and start finding out why and how. I think that's a good point. So
I would add one thing, Marcel, just top of mind, and that's sustainment. And that's perhaps another given as well. Is it's one thing to for all the viewers and listeners here that are thinking about launching coaching with an organization. It's one thing to have a plan on how you're how you're going to bring this in, how you will educate people, how you're going to tie it to your values and make this ingrained. But really to think, how are we going to sustain this over time? Because it's very easy to have a coaching conversation that goes really bad and then give up on it. Right. And at that point, we know that has a downstream impact. It will impact, people's performance, people's engagement. It will it will negatively impact our revenue, our sales, and our customers' experience, right? That are so critical to our success these days as an organization. So to really start thinking about how are we going to sustain this culture, make sure that people are constantly reminded that there is value, that there is something to gain, not just in themselves, but also in their customers. That I would say that's absolutely critical to plan for.
Perfect. Yeah. No, that absolutely makes sense to me. So, is there kind of because we're almost at the top of the episode here. Is there a specific model, I guess, coaching model that because you're making coaching scalable, right? Have you guys developed kind of a specific coaching model? And the only reason why I'm asking is because I remember doing a project a number of years ago in Indonesia where I was brought in for a company that actually wanted to start a coaching culture, and they just didn't know where to start, and so one of the challenges was teaching people how to have that conversation, right? That coaching conversation and what to look for. And so I had to kind of put together a kind of a brief model to say, listen, in every conversation, these are the kind of things these are the type of questions you want to be asking. These are the kind of things you want to be doing in order for you to kind of drive that conversation, and also driving that sense of safety, right? So that people feel comfortable to be able to have that conversation. Did you guys develop something similar as well for?
We did. We did. So we developed a coaching framework, and that coaching framework involves not just your one-on-one coaching conversations, but also other coaching activities that we define, such as observation. So observing, building the skills of our workforce and tracking progress along the way, as well as other things. So we kind of created this ecosystem, if you'd like, for what coaching should look like and feel like, and the cadence of it, the definitions of it. So we went into detail so that people can gauge, how well they're doing against that framework. So absolutely, I strongly encourage that, and also, as much guidance as we can provide our coaches as far as, what should a coaching conversation sound like? What are some things, what's the outcome of a coaching conversation? How do we know that we've succeeded as a coach? How do we know that our coachee has walked away with value? So being able to articulate that, I think, goes a very long way in finding success in this coaching culture.
Yeah. So another good point, right? So that's going to be for me a big takeaway as well, is taking that time to develop kind of that framework as well. So that's important. So while we're on top of the episode, so it's been a great 45 minutes just hanging out with you and talking about this. Yeah. And thanks so much again for coming on the show and sharing everything that you know. And I hope to bring you back on the show one day, and maybe we'll get some more questions and things like that, and always always happy talking about coaching in general. So it's great that we can kind of hear this from a little bit of a different angle as well, which is really cool. So thanks for coming on the show, and and let's do this again in a couple of months or so.
I would love that, Marcel. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to all the listeners and viewers as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to just say goodbye to the audience.
So this was Philippe giving some really great insights and some very valuable lessons here in terms of if you want to start a coaching culture within your organization. And sometimes keeping these frameworks simple really helps us scale these things in the best way possible. So we don't have to overcomplicate coaching, but we have to make sure that we can make it effective, right? So thank you so much for joining the show, and thank you so much for watching. And remember, the show is available on YouTube afterwards as well, so you can always go back and take another look and learn from Philippe once again. And I will see you next time when we're online and live again. Thank you for coming, everybody. See ya.